set, hut.
As the hills of West Virginia resound with the sound of Golden Blue football.
Almost heaven, West Virginia.
Now let's bring on the Mountaineers. Goes around about the 50, the 10, the 5. A touchdown, West Virginia. He did it.
He did it. Patrick White. Touchdown, Tavon Austin.
The Don Nehlen's Mountaineers enjoy walking in where angels fear to tread.
I think you think that these guys are going to fall over dead for you. Well, I got news for you. They're going to punch you right in the mouth. It's Mountaineer pride!
Nothing cheap, nothing dirty, but West Virginia football. West Virginia football.
Leave no doubt tonight. They shouldn't have played the old Golden Blue. Not this night.
They've done it. They've done it. A perfect season. And the Mountaineers, for the first time in history, undefeated and untied.
Don Nehlen and his Mountaineers, for the second time, have finished a regular season with an unblemished mark.
Ain't no stopping the Golden Blue.
It is a great night to be a Mountaineer wherever you may be.
What's going on, Mountaineer Nation? Welcome back into the Country Roads webcast, where we're providing you West Virginia sports content from Mountaineer fans for Mountaineer fans. Here for the April CRW live stream, and this will be a joint show talking football and, of course, talking more basketball transfer portal as well, as we have 4 more prospects to add to the target list here for West Virginia. We'll do that in the back half of the show. Front half of the show, we got some press conference comments to talk about here. Got some notes from cornerback coach Rod West's press conference and Rich Rod's press conference yesterday after West Virginia. You know, they had that draft. They split the teams up and held their first big scrimmage there, and we got some really good evaluations coming out of that. I think there's some good notes on the cornerbacks, particularly how Rod West kind of went about crafting the room, which I think is a really good description by him. And then we have some really good notes from Rich Rod as he dished on the offensive line. We got some, clips and stuff that came out of practice as well because it was open to media briefly. We got some good info on the running backs. Of course, good infos on the corner with Rod West there having a press conference as well. So we got notes from both of those press conferences. Then we'll talk some basketball portal targets here in the back half of the show. And you guys that are tuned in here live, you can share your questions, comments there in the chat. I appreciate those. I'll get some of those towards the end, time permitting. I'll hit on all of them from channel members. And if you want to guarantee yours gets address there, you can send it as a super chat. Always appreciate those. And if you are watching, whether live or on a playback, you can hit the thumbs up button, help out with that crazy YouTube algorithm so this will find more Mountaineer fans like you and me. And be sure you subscribe to the channel, not only to get our WVU News Daily pre-recorded video, which we put out every Monday through Friday here. Today we had a WVU football roster update on that WVU News Daily show, but we are going live pretty much every day throughout the basketball portal process. And of course, with spring football going on, it's multiple live streams here on the channel, so be sure you subscribe. That way you get notified when we go live and you can chat, talk a little Mountaineers with us here in the live chat. So with that out of the way, let's start off talking a little football. Like I said, definitely a lot floating around on social media after yesterday's scrimmage. The university themselves putting out some nice clips. You saw Prince Strawn making some plays. You saw plenty of clips of the O-line, Rick Trickett getting after those guys. You saw pictures floating around of different position groups. So a lot of fun info came out after that scrimmage. And, that's one that we had really been looking forward to for a while after Rich Rod had kind of teased up that they were going to draft, split up the team into a draft type thing to kind of replicate a real game. So we got some good info following that, I think, with yesterday's press conferences, which, I was hoping to get back and talk about last night, but didn't get a chance to, but that's all right. Gives us something to talk about here today. So let's get into that. Let's talk football first, and then in the back half of the show, we'll talk about the new names to add to the portal target list, which we'll pull back up here towards the back half of the show. So let's start off with cornerback coach Rod West. Don't have as many notes on his press conference. I got a majority of them from Rich Rod's, but some good stuff still came on the corners from Coach Rod West as he was asked about the room in general, and he said there's a lot of new faces spaces. It was a point of emphasis to get bigger, and thinks they definitely addressed that with several 6'2" and 6'3" cornerbacks, as we've talked about here throughout the offseason. That's been the one consistent theme throughout most of these press conferences, is trying to get longer, particularly on defense. And in the secondary, I think that you see that, and he kind of went on to detail the reasoning for that. It's because just being in the Big 12, a league where everybody wants to space you out, find the best matchup and try and attack that matchup, sometimes you can be in the best position. If you don't have, a big enough guy, you can't make the play. And they felt that was an issue last year, so they wanted to make sure they didn't have to deal with that this year. That's why they went out and added several 6'2", 6'3" cornerbacks. And he said he's pleased with the progress of the cornerback room thus far, and he also feels better about the depth of the position this year as opposed to where it was at last year. And, of course, was asked about kind of the recruiting process there when they had to bring in a bunch of transfers, because this is a completely rebuilt secondary pretty much. You have, a couple of returners, but for the most part, it's completely rebuilt. And he said that the main thing they looked for is they wanted to target that size that we mentioned there, that length. And the other thing was production at their previous school. Did they get things done at their previous school? Do they have stuff on film that we like? Do they fit within the hard edge culture? Are they going to have the right work ethic? All of those things. But, targeting size and production at the previous school was their main goal with the transfer additions. And they feel like they've got that with the, junior college guys that came from Hutch Community College, with Chom's Jine, with Jair Rollison, on down the list there in the cornerback room. And Jair Rollison is the one that is kind of the, what's the word I'm looking for here? The one that's a little bit different in the room, right? Because we're talking about length at the cornerback spot, and he's the one add that West Virginia brought into that room that doesn't quite have the length of the others. When you look at Jair Rollison only standing about 5'8", 5'9" on a good day, and he joins the other corners in the room like Damon Allen, who's 6'3", Rayshawn Reynolds, who's 6'3", Chom's Jine, who they brought in, is 6'4". So a lot of length there, and he was kind of asked, if you were targeting length, then what was the reasoning for adding Jair Rollison. And of course, he went into that production that he had there at Kent State, but he also talked about kind of how he thinks about crafting his cornerback room. And I thought this was a really good tidbit from cornerbacks coach Rod West, because he compared it to kind of crafting a basketball roster, right? Probably because, number one, he wants, 5 good defensive backs, I'm sure. But also, he said he kind of thinks of it matchup based, right? Like they went out and got this length to help him on the outside, with guys like that we mentioned there, Chom's Jine, Rayshawn Reynolds, Damon Allen, on down the list there with some of the lengthy corners that they added. But he said some teams are still going to have, a 5'9", 5'10" receiver that's super quick twitch, super shifty, and, they can put him in the slot. He can run slants. They can throw screens to him. They can, do jet sweeps, send him on drags, send him downfield on slot fades, all these different things. And how are you going to defend that then? If you, go out and you get these 6'2", 6'3" corners who, have great length, but maybe they're not the best in space. Maybe they're not the best matchup for that guy. So in his mind, he says, we need a guy that can match up with that guy as well. And that's the reason they went out and targeted a guy like Jair Rollison. There's other guys in the room that would fit in that mold as well. I think when you think of like Keyshawn Robinson, some others in there. But I do love his thought process of talking about it, describing his strategy of crafting a cornerback room and comparing it to a basketball roster and saying, it's matchup based. If they have someone that's doing this, we need a guy that can counter it and cover that as well. And so I think we've got multiple body types in the room, and I think he's happy about the depth and all those things. I think hopefully point to an improved secondary here in 2026 as cornerback coach Rod West. Those were the notes I had from his comments. The main thing that I wanted to hit on there was what he talked about there last. I think we saved the best for last with his there, because I really thought that was interesting, the way he compared crafting the cornerback room to, building a basketball roster. So with that, let's go to Rich Rod's comments, and this is where we get into some of the really juicy stuff as he dished on, multiple position groups and also dished on kind of performances in the scrimmage, which this was kind of the first big scrimmage where they tried to replicate a game scenario. They divided the teams up, all of those fun things. And I'm sure they'll scrimmage again with these teams before it's all said and done. I think this is the last practice this week, but next week they're getting 3 practices in. Of course, then you have the spring game coming up on the 18th, a little over a week away, a week from Saturday. Actually, hard to believe it's already here. But from Rich Rod's comments, got some notes on these. He talked about the scrimmage that took place yesterday. They got about 50 to 60 plays in during the scrimmage after splitting up the team and trying to treat it like a real game, a true game scenario like we talked about there. But I really liked to hear that he thought they got better and he was pleased, because that's kind of the polar opposite of what we heard in some recent media sessions there from Rich Rod. He highlighted that they tackled better and they made a few plays. The intensity level and the engagement level was good, which I think are really good signs for the team buying into this culture, for the team buying into the way that they want to practice, the way that they want to attack every drill, every scenario, all of that in practice. I think that's looking up, that they're starting to really understand that already. He said they're starting to see improvement in the short yardage game, because he was asked about that specifically. We all remember last year, right, when Rich Rod said, got to get that much, and they brought in a ton of offensive linemen to help them, get that much. They brought in Rick Trickett, who's going to be the biggest addition of the offseason, in my opinion. And it sounds like it's already starting to pay off. As he said, they're seeing improvement in short yardage plays, but still called it a work in progress, and they will continue to make it a point of emphasis, as they should. He talked about the Darius Morant addition, which if you guys haven't heard about the addition of Darius Morant yet, be sure to check out the WVU News Daily video I put out this morning that featured a WVU football roster update, as West Virginia has added another running back into the room there for depth purposes in Darius Morant, a transfer from Temple. He talked about him and then went on to talk a little bit about the running back room extensively. So on the running back room, he said that Chris Talley made some nice runs in the scrimmage, and funny enough, that was the first name that he actually mentioned when talking about the running backs, was Chris Talley. So, to me, I try and read the tea leaves on stuff like this throughout the spring, right? The fact that he's the first name that he brought up kind of means that he's on the forefront of his mind, maybe, in my opinion. Then he talked about Martavius Boswell, who really popped some good runs as well, and then had some really nice things to say and was complimentary about Andre Devine, who it sounds like can get in the mix this year, if not as a good depth piece in the running back room, maybe on special teams. More on that momentarily. But he said Andre Devine has been running really hard and thinks he has a chance to help the room. He showed some flashes in the scrimmage. And then, that was kind of the three running backs he talked about there in that segment, and then went on to talk a little bit more about the two running backs that we kind of would expect him to highlight with, Cam Cook and Amari Latimer. He said they mostly rested Cam Cook during the scrimmage. Obviously, they know what they have there with him. No need to make him go, live more often than you need to, because he's going to be an important piece that you're going to need to be kind of a bell cow this season. So, save some of those carries for the season. I'm all for that. No problem with that. And then he was asked about Amari Latimer and said Amari Latimer runs like a big guy and is a physical guy. But, of course, being a true freshman, he is still learning, but he has a lot of skills and he likes his progress thus far. I still, I'm kind of leaning towards Amari Latimer being the second string running back behind Cam Cook, in my opinion. We'll see how that, goes moving forward. But I think with Amari Latimer, with Cam Cook, you have a couple of really physical guys. And then I think, that, of course, don't sleep on their speed. They can both break big ones. I'm not saying that, but I think you have two really physical guys with those two. And then I think with the other two running backs he mentioned, Chris Talley, Martavius Boswell, you have some guys that can really give you a change of pace, some really good speed guys that can, be big play threats. And then Andre Devine, you might fit into that same category as well. So he went on to talk a little bit about special teams, and this is where we mentioned Andre Devine again. As Rich Rod said, they're going to dedicate one of the three practices next week. As I said, they'll have 3 practice sessions next week, and they're going to dedicate one of those, at least a part of one of those, to special teams and try and work on some return men, because that's one thing he feels like they haven't worked on enough yet in this spring. And he was asked about Andre Devine. He said he didn't think Devine would factor in the mix at punt returner, but he did say he thinks Andre Devine will be in the mix as potentially one of the kick returners. So we'll keep an eye on that, see if he ends up earning a role there on kick return. Whether it's the return man or just on the unit in general, he didn't necessarily specify, but I think Andre Devine will have a role on special teams one way or the other for West Virginia this year. It sounds like he said in this scrimmage they played faster, but they're still not anywhere near as fast as they want to go come August, which is something that excites me. I love that up-tempo spot the ball style, as I'm sure a lot of us do, right? And it seems like we're going to have the ability to really crank up that tempo at times here in the fall if they're already, throughout the spring here, later in the spring practice able to go a little bit faster. By the time the fall rolls around, they should be able to really crank that thing up. Then here's when we get to talking about some of the offensive line, and I think that this is really interesting here. Some good tidbits have come out about offensive line, so this is one of the main things I wanted to talk about here today is the offensive line, because Malik Agbo is someone he talked about. Malik Agbo's now up over 300 pounds, and he's learning both right and left tackle, and said he thinks that Malik Agbo can be one of their key cogs. That's, the way that he quoted it. And then he said they want 8 guys that they can play with up front, but he feels like they can get to 10. And I think that really speaks to a lot of the guys that they brought in, mixed with the few guys that you had returning that will factor in there. I think that's a really good sign for the offensive line. Of course, behind Rick Trickett, a lot of those guys are cross-training, and he was kind of asked about that. And Coach Trickett does do a good job of, making people learn both left and right side. He mentioned that Kevin Brown, Malik Agbo, Deshaun Woods, and Carson Cassidy are guys that are working exclusively at tackle, although they are learning both sides. Those are guys that will definitely be tackles. Nick Cray can play guard and tackle. Landon Livingston can play all spots. Cameron Griffin can play all spots as well. Devin Vass has been dealing with an injury, so he wasn't, mentioned too much. He did throw that into there. And then Wes King, who we got over from Wyoming, we thought he might be a guard. Actually, he's been playing mostly center, and I think in a lot of the clips that came out from practice, he was there at the center. And then Amari Bubba Grayson could also snap and play center if you need to. So, if you're looking right now, we know Landon Livingston's played center in the past. We know that Wes King's playing center now. Bubba Grayson can snap. They mentioned Cameron Griffin can play all 5 positions. So you got at least 4 guys that could snap. So I think you got good depth in that terms, in those terms. And then between Devin Vass, Cameron Griffin, Bubba Grayson, Landon Livingston, Nick Cray, there's 5 guys for the 2, guard spots. Some of those, of course, can play center as well, but that's 5 there for the guard spots. And then you talk about Kevin Brown, Malik Agbo, Deshaun Woods, and Carson Cassidy out at tackle. There's 4 more. That's 9 guys right there. So I definitely agree with Rich Rod's comments of them potentially having 10 ready once the fall rolls around. I think that is a definite possibility. And, hearing some of his comments on the offensive line, hearing Rick Trickett's that we've talked about in previous live streams, I'm starting to get a little giddy about this offensive line, especially after seeing some clips and looking just how big they are and the way that they're able to mix things around. I think, in the clips that we saw yesterday, it looked like, Malik Agbo out at tackle. You had Landon Livingston playing one of the guard spots. You had Wes King at center. Then you had, I believe it was it Cameron Grayson at the other, Cameron Griffin at the other tackle, or Bubba Grayson, one of the 2. I think it was Bubba Grayson. And then, of course, out at right tackle, you had Kevin Brown. So, that's just the 5 that we saw in some of the clips that were put out, and that's a solid 5 right there, and that's not even including some of these other guys that we mentioned that can be factors as well, I think. So really excited about the potential of this offensive line. And then the last thing that we had here on Rich Rod's comments is that they didn't let Scotty Fox and Michael Hawkins go live. He's still, toying around with the idea of doing that in a future scrimmage here before spring wraps up. But, he says both those guys he feels confident in. They both have game experience. The moment's not going to be too big for either one of them, and he didn't really feel the need to have them go live. However, he did mention Max Brown went live. Of course, Scotty Fox and Michael Hawkins had on the 2-hand touch jerseys, but Max Brown went live, and because of that, he made some plays running the football, which was good to hear there. If he's going to be, your 3rd guy, you want to hear that he's making plays as well, as it definitely seems like Scotty Fox and Michael Hawkins are the main 2 competitors in the quarterback battle there. But that's what I had as far as comments from the press conferences from Coach Rod West and, of course, Rich Rod himself. I think some really interesting stuff there coming out about the corners, about the running backs, and really about the offensive line as well. Really excited about their potential progress here throughout the spring. So with that, let's switch gears. Let's talk a little WVU basketball now. Let's get into some more portal targets here on that side of things. Then I will get some of your all's comments here before we wrap up. But let's add 4 more names to our transfer target list before then, right? So let's do that. Let's start here with from Sam Kaiser, who's been a good source here on social media for this. And we're talking about Colgate transfer Jalen Cox. He's receiving interest from the following programs per his agents: Indiana, Kentucky, UCLA, Syracuse. Huge list here. I'm not going to read through them all, but right there in the mix is, of course, West Virginia. That's why we're talking about him, right? And this guy can really fill it up. From Colgate, of course, would be a move up in competition for him. But when you look at his numbers, this is a scoring guard, guys, and a scoring guard with pretty good length at that. As we pull up his profile here on ESPN, 6'3" guard, 18 points per game, 5 rebounds per game, and 5 assists per game. So not only a really good scorer, but surprisingly good rebounding numbers and really good assist numbers as well. And he did that on over 50% from the field, which makes it even more impressive there. And we go down and look at his numbers for the season. 37% from three-point range, 85% from the free throw stripe, and that assist to turnover number is really impressive there as far as that margin is concerned. Over 5 assists per game to just 2 turnovers per game. That's what you want there, an assist to turnover ratio. And then also, let's add in the fact that he's averaging 2 steals per game nearly as well, so he could help on the defensive end. And at 6'3", good length, and he's gotten better every year of his college career, from 5 points per game to 12 to 18 this past season, really filling it up. And you look at his recent games, 26 points and 5 assists versus Lehigh, 21 points and 11 assists in the game there in the Patriot League Championship semifinal. And then back in the quarterfinal, how about 38 points, 3 steals, 11 rebounds, and 2 assists. So really impressive stats there for Jalen Cox, who is someone that West Virginia has targeted and is interested in here, potentially in the portal, as we add about 4 more names to our target list here on this stream. That is one of them that we're talking about. The others here are coming courtesy of Jerry West Enthusiast. He's been a good source here on social media as well. As he says, Kareem Thomas has been contacted by West Virginia. He's a transfer from Dartmouth. So let's pull up Kareem Thomas's profile here on ESPN, highlight him really quickly. And then, of course, after I go through these names, I will pull up the current transfer contact list for West Virginia, which continues to grow here, and we'll add these names to that list. But this is another lengthy guard that can really score the basketball. 6'5", nearly 16 points per game, 3 rebounds and over 1 assist, and doing it on 45% from the field there at Dartmouth. Yet again, someone that would be transferring up, but he's a little bit younger than the prospect we just talked about as well, and a little bit more of a marksman, because we're talking he actually shot better from 3-point range than he did his regular 2-point field goal percentage, which is super impressive. 45% from 3-point range, 80% from the free throw stripe, and recently scored 22 points against Princeton, 22 points against Brown as well, and over 50% in 3-point percentage on both of those contests was Kareem Thomas, another prospect West Virginia is potentially interested in that we will add to our target list. And we got a couple of more here. Let's go ahead. Let's talk about one that would be an in-conference transfer potentially. And this one is interesting because this would be a transfer from BYU, Dominique Diamande. And he was a freshman this past season, didn't really play a ton, but great length. And he's a player that's an international prospect. BYU was able to get him to commit to the Cougars, but West Virginia's had some success with some international players in the past. This would be another one that you could put into that category. Not the best numbers yet at BYU, but he was just there as a true freshman. Like we said, played sparingly. But you look as a 6'7", 190-pound forward, originally from France, I think that his game would translate, and if BYU was targeting him, it's probably someone that could be a good player in the future. So 2 points per game at BYU on 46% from the field. Like I said, didn't play a ton. 24 games, only averaged 7 minutes per game, ends up with those numbers. But even in the spare playing time that he got, averaged nearly a steal per game, which was impressive. And you can see, later in the season, starting to play some games, he actually had 6 points and 3 steals against WVU in their game against us there in the Big 12 tournament, and had a couple of games that were very similar there in the Big 12 tournament, as he also had 6 points and 3 steals against Kansas. And then against Houston, he had 4 points and 3 steals there in the first round. So, the one consistent there was his defense, and I think that's where his length probably comes into play and why West Virginia is probably interested in him. They feel like he could be someone that they can employ, help them defensively, help them hit the glass probably as well. So we'll keep an eye on Dominique Diamande. We'll add him to the list momentarily, but we have one more player we got to talk about before we pull up that transfer tracker, and this one will excite Mountaineer fans because the one thing we're always talking about is wanting more centers, wanting more length. here's a big man for you. And West Virginia has contacted Samson Eltan from Yale, the second player West Virginia has been in contact with from Yale, actually. And we'll pull up his profile here on ESPN. As we see, 6'10", so great size there, getting close up there in the 7-foot range. 6'10", 223. This past season at Yale, 8 points, 6 rebounds, 58% from the field. And go down, look at his numbers here, and you can see also over a block per game for the second consecutive year. So definitely, fits that rim protector mold, has gotten better as a rebounder, and, that size is always good. You love to see your team going after size like that in the transfer portal with a guy like Samson Eltan that West Virginia is potentially targeting. So with that, let's pull up that transfer target list now. We'll highlight these 4 additions, and then I'll get some of your all's comments here before we wrap up on this stream. As we see, all 4 names that we just talked about there at the bottom of the transfer contact list thus far for West Virginia. Jalen Cox, the guard from Colgate, who can really score it. Kareem Thomas from Dartmouth, who can really score it as well. I think both those two were the best scorers in this group. And then I think when you look at Eltan, that would be obviously, someone to help you out in the front court, someone to help you out as a rim protector and provide length on your roster. And then someone that's more developmental, but with a really high ceiling in Dominique Diamande from BYU that could help you out on the defensive side of things. So you add those 4 names to the now kind of lengthy transfer target list for West Virginia, which probably will only continue to grow as we have guys like another center, Mohamed Sia out of Georgia Tech, up at the top of that list. He, of course, is via that Bella Vista connection, previous teammate of Miles Sadler. West Virginia very much in the mix there. You have Javon Buchanan, a forward from Boise State, that should be visiting WVU this weekend as players can begin to take visits starting tomorrow. So I think here in short order, we're probably going to start hearing about some commitments for the Mountaineers and can't wait to add some names to the transfer in list. You have guard Jason Edwards out of Providence, had played for Ross Hodge a couple of years ago at North Texas, so the connection is definitely there. You guys that followed me talking about transfers last offseason, remember he was one that I really wanted West Virginia to pick up, ended up going to Providence instead, but maybe West Virginia gets him this time around. Both he and Javon Buchanan would need eligibility waivers, though. You have a guard in Brant Byer, 6'8", out of Miami, Ohio, who can really shoot. Forward in Tyleek Weeks out of Southern Miss, who's absolute scoring threat, one of the better scorers here on this list, especially there as far as the front court player is concerned. Adam Olson out of South Alabama at 6'8". Ian Elmer, another guard from Miami, Ohio, at 6'6". So you got a couple of Miami, Ohio players on this list, a couple of Yale players on this list, as we just talked about one in Samson Eltan, but you also previously we've talked about Isaac Silascar. And if you want more info on any of these, check out the previous streams I've done here on the channel. Jacob Walker, a guard from Sam Houston. And then my personal favorite of the transfers West Virginia's reached out to, although he has a ton of suitors, is guard Terrence Hill from VCU. I think he's the best scorer, on this list. I think he's one of the best scorers in the portal in general. Abdi Bashir, a guard from Kansas State who can really shoot it at 6'7". I did see he is visiting St. John's, though. Western Michigan guard Jalen Griffith on the list at 5'10". Jameer Jones at 6'6" from Providence, and guard Javonte Edwards at 6'1" out of Canisius. Join the 4 we just talked about there with Jalen Cox, Kareem Thomas, Samson Eltan, and Dominique Diamande. So that thus far is the transfer target list for West Virginia that I've been able to keep up with. I'm sure there may be more names that they've reached out to that aren't yet on my list. I'll add them to them in due time if I do find out about them. And of course, West Virginia will probably reach out to more players as some of these, will inevitably decide to, go elsewhere besides WVU. West Virginia will backfill this list, continue to reach out to other players in the portal, and there's plenty of them. We're talking thousands of players there in the portal, and I really like the guys West Virginia's targeted thus far. You see the common theme through here is definitely length. West Virginia trying to get longer in a lot of areas. Anyone that's, under 6'6" can really score the basketball here on this list. We've definitely seen that. They're elite scorers, or marksmen, one of the two or both, with the guys that West Virginia have targeted that doesn't have size. But you definitely see length as a common theme for West Virginia here on the target list thus far as we update it with 4 more names there added into the mix. So having said that, that's what I had, guys. I'll get some of your all's comments here before we wrap up. I'll get some from channel members and anyone else that is in here as well if I got enough time to hop to those. But really appreciate you guys tuning into this one, whether you watch live or on a playback. Either way, hit the thumbs up button before you head out. Help out with that crazy YouTube algorithm. Be sure you subscribe to the channel, as I'll continue to go live pretty much daily throughout this process with transfer portal updates for West Virginia as more targets emerge, as hopefully here in the near future, guys start to commit to the Mountaineers. And we got plenty more spring football practices, I think 3 or 4 more to talk about here, so definitely be live to talk about those in addition to the pre-recorded content here on the channel. If you didn't get a chance to chat live, throw your thoughts in the comment section there. We'll respond to those in text form as soon as I can. I always enjoy chatting about the Mountaineers with you guys. So with that, let me get some of your all's comments here before we wrap up. We got channel member Trey Edwards saying Twitter was lighting up about Sela. Sounds like they're worried about him not committing yet. Yeah, I saw a little bit of that. I'm not too worried yet. Like I said, a lot of guys are probably going to want to visit before they commit. So, if it gets into the weekend or past the weekend and he hasn't committed yet, then that's when I'll start to worry a little bit more. I still got a pretty good feeling that he's going to end up a Mountaineer. I do think there's other guys definitely going after him for sure. I think it was on 3 put out an article that 10 programs that are really interested in him. But I like West Virginia's chances, especially with the connection with Yusuf Ali, the Bella Vista guys that are coming in. I think West Virginia's got a good chance there on Muhammad Sia, and still not giving up hope on that one. I still got a good feeling about it for now. For now, Trey, for sure. Devil Dog 44 says, let's go. Hey, let's go Mountaineers, Devil Dog. Devil Dog says 8-4 regular season and a bowl win. These dogs will hunt. Everyone that was at the practice that posted something all say intensity is the word of the day every day. I agree, man. I talked about that a little bit last year after the season ended. You look, 0-1. Rich Rod went 3-9, flipped it around, went 9-3, 9-4 the next year. I think the West Virginia has the chance to do that again here in Rich Rod 2.0 era. 4-8 in year one. I think we very much could go 8-4 this year, and love that intensity is being preached, and I love even more, and we talked about it some in the Rich Rod comments there, that the players are rising to that standard of, playing with that intensity on every snap, which is really exciting to hear. And I think that we've got some guys that really fit the culture this year. We've gotten more athletic. We've gotten a lot bigger. All of those things should lead to more wins on Saturday. Devil Dog 44, channel member, says we have several Robert Sands body types in the back end of the D now. Yeah, we truly do. We truly do have some really long and scary guys back there that do fit in that Robert Sands mold. I agree with that. Then we have... It's Coop24 says Pop Isaacs entered the portal. How does he have eligibility? A good question. I ask myself that a lot anymore when it comes to a lot of these transfers. I'm like, that guy's still around? I was thinking that, in the Crown basketball tournament when we were playing Nigel Pack. I was like, this guy's still playing? He was on that Final Four team with Jim Larinaga in Miami. He was at Kansas State before that. Sometimes it's surprising that these guys last as long as they do. That's for sure. But, hey, he's a good player. Pop Isaacs is a good player for sure. But that's what I had on this one, guys. Appreciate you all that tuned in here, chimed in with some comments in the live chat there. Like I said, if you didn't get a chance to chat live, drop them in the comment section as well. Always enjoy hearing your all's thoughts on anything that we discuss or anything you want to talk there, WVU sports related. And, of course, I always want to plug the channel membership here. If you haven't yet, and you're able to support, hit the join button down below to do so, or you can find that same join button over on the YouTube channel homepage, not only to help me, continue to pay the bills, continue to keep the content coming and all that fun stuff, but more importantly, you help yourself to a bunch of WVU sports bonus content, including things like player grades, snap counts, and film reviews after WVU football games, behind the scenes videos, monthly member hangout streams, game rewatch commentaries, a lot of fun stuff there for channel members, and always appreciate you guys for your support there. And like I said, you can do that with the join button down below. Priority access and chat and comments too comes along with that. But hey, if you can't support that way, you can help out fast, easy, and free with the thumbs up button before you stop watching the video, whether you're watching live or on a playback. And just make sure you got that subscribe button clicked. Doesn't cost you anything. You'll get these videos directly into your feed, and you'll get notified when I go live, as I will plenty here throughout the transfer portal process for WVU basketball and as WVU football continues here with spring football practice. But that's what I had for this one, guys. Some really exciting comments there, I think, in regards to the corners, the running backs, and definitely the offensive line. I was really kind of giddy with what we've been hearing about the offensive line, and I like that they're moving guys around to potentially get the best 5 out there. I like the new 4 names that we've added to the transfer target list. Hopefully we get some commitments coming in here in short order for West Virginia once visits pick up starting tomorrow, and as those do come in, of course, be back in future live streams streams to talk some more WVU basketball portal news with you guys. But having said that, appreciate you all. Hope you guys have a good rest of your Thursday today. And until next time, let's go Mountaineers.